Again, I'm excited to turn things over and announce today's session titled Expanding the Base: What Companies and Organizations Are Doing to Promote and Protect Animal Agriculture. This session is being moderated by Jane Hillstrom, Vice President, Reputation Management at Filament. Again, a full session description and full biographies for all of our speakers are available in the virtual event center. With that, I'll turn things over to Jane. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Hannah, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Today's environment is challenging, right? I think we can all agree on that. And sharing agriculture's story involves understanding the audience, then determining how to use emotion to connect with that audience, and then telling compelling stories to reach that audience. Over the years, I've worked with many checkoff organizations who do a great job of actively telling the story of the commodities that they represent. However, after seeing videos such as The Farmer and A Woman's Place by Land O'Lakes, and I know you've all seen God Made a Farmer by Dodge, I began to wonder, these all champion the agricultural lifestyle and really contribute to telling the agricultural story. But what are other companies doing? Is everybody advocating for agriculture? Well, today's panelists are, and their companies are telling the true story of agriculture. They captivate, they connect, they educate, and they influence. And every time we all do this, it benefits all of us. So today we're going to look at what are they doing and what can we learn from them. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you a poll question. So, is your company advocating for agriculture? And you can answer, yes, it's a major initiative. You need to do more. We plan to. It's not a priority, and I'm not sure. So if you could just take a second and click on an answer and press submit. We'll take a look at it. I'm hopeful that you're all advocating because that's truly what we need, right? So the answer is yes, it's a major initiative for more than half of you. But the reason we're having this session is because of the other answers, right? We all need to do more. Well, our goal today is to hear what others are doing and be inspired by their advocacy. Because as you know, it's going to take every single individual, every company to really, anybody that's related to food or agriculture, to really start telling that story of farming, on-farm practices, and the bigger agricultural community. So let's get started with our first dynamic speaker. I'd like to introduce to you Sharyl Sauer. Sharyl is Global Business Platforms Communications Leader for Corteva Agriscience. She leads strategic internal and external communications in support of the seed, crop protection, and digital global business platforms. Sharyl is a core member of the internal team with Corteva, seeking to better connect the company with consumers and society. Sharyl worked for the beef and dairy industries prior to joining Corteva. She also serves as the vice chair of the communications committee of U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action. So welcome, Sharyl. Please tell us about Corteva and your efforts to advocate on behalf of agriculture. And why does Corteva feel it's important to invest in this area? So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to advance my first slide here. There we go. So I want to just give a quick introduction on Corteva. We are a new company, and then I'll get to the meat of the topic today, which is advocating for agriculture. So for those of you that may or may not be familiar with Corteva Agriscience, we are about to celebrate our second anniversary on June 1st as a standalone agriculture company. We were created by the merger of DuPont Crop Protection, Dow Agrisciences, and Pioneer Seed. So today, Corteva Agriscience is a global company. We operate in about 140 countries. We have 21,000 full-time employees, extensive network of sales professionals reaching more than 10 million farmers and ranchers around the world. And we have a very broad portfolio of solutions for farmers and ranchers. So in the seed realm, we have corn, corn is king. We have corn and soybeans, rice, sunflower, sorghum, canola, and then we also have silage inoculants. We produce biotech seed and non-biotech seed. In our crop protection business platform, we have crop protection solutions that work on the row crops that I mentioned, but we also have a lot of solutions for fruits and vegetables, for tree nuts, for range and pasture, for turf and ornamental. So everything from grass to grapes to grapefruits, we have a crop protection solution for it. And similar to the organic and biotech solutions we have in seed, we have synthetically created, lab created crop protection solutions, but also those that are naturally derived, and considered biologicals like pheromones, et cetera. And then digital tools and software for farmers. So because we have such a broad portfolio, and our portfolio is products that go into livestock feed as well as human food, our purpose statement is very broad. So when we created Corteva, our purpose is to enrich the lives of those who produce and those who consume, ensuring progress for generations to come. So putting the consumer in our vision statement has really given us a different lens from which we operate. So yes, we're absolutely innovating for the future of farming, and we are working to help preserve the livelihoods of farmers and ranchers for generations to come. But we're also bridging that gap between farmers and consumers around trust and around transparency, and we're committed to sustainability. 1 year ago, we announced 14 sustainability goals. Those goals are around farmers and providing training. They're around reducing greenhouse gases, soil and water health, benefiting the communities where our employees and customers live and work, and enabling youth and women. And then also around making sure that our own operations are green. And I'll talk a little bit more about our commitments as we go in with the panel discussion. I want to give a couple of examples of some of the things that we're doing that are kind of innovative and different. And one, open innovation. And throughout my slides, and if you go on the slides that we have to share, there are a few web links, so you can go get more information if you want to read more about open innovation, for example. But Pepsi and Corteva work together to map the oat genome. And why is that important? Well, oats are a very important human nutritional grain, it's a food solution. And the oat genome is very, very complex. So it's got 12 million base pairs, whereas the human genome only has 3. So I think it's kind of interesting that this food grain is more complex than even our own human DNA. So by mapping the oat genome and putting it in the public space, we're hoping to spur additional research that offer better yields, disease resistant, and then hopefully improve nutritional characteristics. Another example beyond research and innovation is thinking outside the box for new innovations that benefit farmers and ranchers. So with this audience, I wanted to highlight Land Visor. So Land Visor is a service that works with farmers and ranchers that have large croplands to manage, pasture lands to manage. So it helps to manage an invasive species. For example, in this case, it's mesquite. So mesquite is an invasive shrub. It's very difficult to kill and to manage. So we use sophisticated satellite imagery to actually locate on hundreds or thousands of acres where the mesquite is growing and when it's growing and when is the exact right time to treat. So by doing that, it's more efficient, it uses less crop protection chemicals, helps to maintain the biodiversity and the nutritional quality of that pasture land, and it's a more sustainable solution. Another way that Corteva is working to be different is listening and inviting those tough conversations. So if you visit corteva.com, I took a screenshot. That's what's on the left side of the screen is. This is one of our pages that's directed at the public. So we've got everything from blogs written by our scientists on how to start a garden inside and some of the science behind improving food nutrition, to video logs by employees, to just discussions. So we want to make sure that we're creating a place to have discussions and to invite some of the tough conversations. We also sponsor a podcast, and you can find it on Apple podcast called The Growing Debate, where we openly discuss in a 30-minute-ish format some of the tough discussions around, for example, climate change or the price of producing food. And then our commitment to transparency. So we've got another page on our website around making scientific information and food information accessible. So not just putting it out there, but putting it out there in a way that the public can understand and then have a discussion. And I'll talk more about that too. I just have 2 more slides. Putting our voice, agriculture's voice, in unexpected places. So we participate in a lot of nutritional conferences and like the Culinary Institute of America, but we've also sponsored for the 2nd year a BBC series, Follow the Food, and it's beautiful cinematography. It's out there on BBC, but we're trying to make how food is produced accessible to the public, put it out there in formats that have a long shelf life where people can go and get more information and then follow up. And then another kind of fun one is this Farming Simulator League. Gaming is very big, it's very cool, and there's a lot of people that actually spend a lot of time becoming experts at running a farm virtually. So we make sure that the information is accurate, but it's another way to reach maybe a younger population, or just put, how food is produced in a different context. And then, of course, we do participate, as Jane mentioned, I serve on U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action, but Corteva does advocate and or belong to a lot of ag groups where we're looking at policies, positions, and putting information out, everything from Crop Life to ASTA to Bio and a number of other public groups or industry groups. And then finally, Food Chain Connects. So we actually have almost what we call a help desk for farmers and ranchers. So consumers today want to know how their food is produced, that it's produced sustainably, that it's good for them, it's good for the planet. So in addition to regulatory protocols, a lot of retailers are putting additional protocols in place, like sourcing protocols. So because we produce so many, for example, crop protection products that are used in the food industry, we want to make sure that farmers know what crop protection products are able to be used in what markets for what retailers to meet their protocols. So we're really trying to make it easy for farmers and retailers to hit those societal needs. So that was my quick overview.
Thank you, Sharyl. And you already have a question that Hannah did a great job answering. I want to share that we will have 45 minutes at the end of this section for all of your questions. So if you have questions for Sharyl now, put them in and we'll make sure we get to those. But I can tell you I'm completely inspired at the amount of information that Corteva is putting out to the consumer, from your podcast to your gaming. As we all know, it's the #1 pastime of males, I think, in their 30s. So great job. We'll keep moving on. And I want to introduce to you Stuart. Stuart Leith serves as Chief Sustainability Officer for Smithfield Foods, Inc. In this role, he leads the company's sustainability program and oversees company-wide regulatory initiatives. Prior to joining Smithfield Foods, Stewart was a partner at a Virginia law firm where he represented the firm's clients in matters involving major federal and state environmental statutes. Stewart also previously served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So welcome, Stewart. I know Smithfield has been sharing its sustainability story for a while, and I'd love for you to tell us more about your company, your programs and initiatives, and really how it's evolved over the years. So Stuart, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane, and I can see my slides, and I just have a few for you. I'm happy to be here and to talk with you all today. And Smithfield has been active in this area for a couple of decades. And our sustainability platform has evolved over time to address a lot of changes over that time, both in terms of the interest of stakeholders or customers who the big companies buy millions of pounds of our product, and by consumers who, as Sharyl said, want to know where their food comes from, how it's made, what's in it, and they want to know, if you're dealing with protein, how animals on farms are treated. And as we emerge from COVID and the events over the past year, this further influences the views of our views, at least on sustainability. I'll talk about those things in a minute. But I would want to say at the beginning, at the outset, and I go into Smithfield's approach on this. I know my fellow panelists and so many of the folks who are here on virtually, there's a challenge here for us. We all get up every day and think about, in our companies, how to put safe, affordable food on the table, how to treat and care for animals on farms, how to further minimize, environmental impacts and how to keep our employees safe. That's what we do every day. But there's a crowd out there and the voices are loud and it's well financed that, they criticize modern agriculture. They want to know how to disrupt it. They want to undermine the trust in the food system. And it's unbelievable. I mean, I heard Sonny Perdue in a speech a couple of years ago say that, the United States is a superpower of food production. And it's absolutely true. When in human history have we had such an ability to have safe, affordable food, throughout the population? But those forces are out there. And I think, the challenge for all of us, adding to your list of what you do every day is to try to tell your story and to be out there and communicate about the truth about American agriculture. So that's my stump speech at the very beginning, but I want to tell you a little bit about Smithfield because I'm proud of where we've been in the sustainability story. We are a vertically integrated company. We're a food company, mainly the protein business. We make a lot of ham, bacon, and sausage and other products. We're vertically integrated, meaning we literally work from farm to fork. We have a lot of farms, over 500 farms that we own and operate, but we also have contract relationships with literally thousands of family farmers who either have long-term contracts with us to produce and raise animals on farms for us that we own, or to sell animals that they own directly to our plants to make food. We have about 60,000 employees, and we operate coast to coast United States and Europe, and we have joint ventures in Mexico. We have significant poultry operations in Europe as well, but mostly we're a pork company. So that's Smithfield, and I tell you where we've been. This slide that I put up is Smithfield, sustainability journey over the decades, and it's a busy slide. But what I really want to leave you with here is that sustainability has really evolved. It's evolved from a really heavy focus on environment to and literally environmental compliance to meet challenges that we had in the 90s, but also to continuous improvement and to bolt on things that we've identified as issues for our company and for our industry. So animal care and worker safety and other things. And these aren't things that are typically associated with sustainability. I think most people think of sustainability on ESG and CSR in terms of environmental and social issues, but it's a broad platform. And the takeaway here in the leadership is really leadership and our focus on doing things first and trying to be out there. Examples include changing the way that we raise sows on company-owned farms, from traditional stalls to group housing systems, from being very transparent about how we use medicines such as antibiotics. We're I think the only large company that reports on antibiotic use every year, and we do it. We do a lot of communication on how medicines are used and vaccines and antibiotics. We announced just a few years ago that we were going to be reduce our carbon footprint 25% by the year 2025. Those are some of the examples of where we've been, and this is sort of where we're headed. We are, the next slide, please. We're moving, we talk about our sustainability platform and pillars. We've always had, at least in the last few years, pillars involving animal care and environment, food safety, and helping our communities, and something we call people. We've expanded our pillars this year, and this will be in our sustainability report, to really expand into such things such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. health and wellness and our workers. So those are standalone pillars now where we can sort of highlight and focus on those things and tell stories about what we're doing in those space to help things. You know, our health and wellness, as an example, of health and wellness pillar talks about the importance of protein in the human diet and how those things are good for the human condition. But it also talks about our Smithfield bioscience focus, which takes things that normally people don't eat or consume and makes things that are good for the human condition, such as pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So by expanding these pillars, we're really focusing on a much broader picture than even it was before. And underlying all those things is something we call value creation, which is really a shared values approach, trying to show where all these things are creating value, not only for the company, but for our many, many stakeholders. Our next slide, in terms of trust and transparency, we're just like Corteva and the other folks who will be talking on the phone, we're trying to find ways to bring people into our farm and to talk about things in a way that people understand. And one of the ways we're doing that is our 360-degree virtual reality video. You can go online and if you actually have video goggles, you can see it in 3D, which is actually pretty neat. But you can also watch it on the screen without having to have those goggles. But it takes you inside a modern hog farm, in a sow farm and also a finishing farm. We have two separate video series. And you can actually be in there, and if you have the video goggles, it's like you're inside of a barn, and you can look around and see what's going on. There are pop-up videos as to what's going on, what you're looking at, what the equipment is, what the handlers and the husbandry folks in the farm are doing at the particular time when the picture was taken. And it's like you're in a barn without having to go through the biosecurity and showering in and showering out that you would normally have to do on a modern hog farm today. So that's one example of trying to bring folks to the farm when they may not be able to or may not be interested in taking a drive out to the country. And my last slide is really a focus on going forward. I think one of the things that you all probably observed as well as I did is before COVID, all you could really see, you turn up every page of the paper you could see was an issue about climate. And that sort of went by the wayside a bit over the attention over COVID and the other issues over the course of the past year. But concerns over climate and environment have come roaring back. I know you all know that. And I mentioned that we had a bold commitment of a few years ago to reduce our greenhouse gases emissions 25% by the year 2025. And we've sort of re-upped that as we emerge from COVID. We're going to be carbon negative by the year 2030. And we're making a huge commitment to addressing climate issues. And I think most people, particularly as consumers who are younger and younger, are looking for companies to do their own part to address climate issues. And one of the ways we're doing that is exciting work that we're doing on our farms to produce renewable energy on hog farms across the country. So that's I just wanted to mention those highlights. I'm happy to have Q&A and to talk more in depth about that, Jane, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Stuart. I am inspired by all the pillars of sustainability that Smithfield has. As Stuart said, it's gone so much farther than environmental. It's really all about social sustainability, looking at health and wellness and diversity and worker conditions. So look forward to hearing more about that in the Q&A. Let's go on to our next panelist. Emily Johannes is the Senior Manager of Sustainability Sourcing for Nestle USA. She leads the U.S. food and beverage sourcing strategy in support of Nestle's global and regional sustainability and animal care commitments. She is responsible for ensuring compliance with the Nestle Responsible Sourcing Standard and collaborating on projects with suppliers, farmers, non-governmental organizations, and stakeholders. Emily holds a master's in ecology and is pursuing another postgraduate degree in food marketing. So Emily, would you please tell us what role animal agriculture plays at Nestle and how you are working with the animal protein industry to drive sustainable change to share with consumers. And Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And thanks so much to the Animal Ag Alliance for having me in this webinar today. I'm pleased to speak with you about some of the efforts that Nestle is doing to promote animal agriculture and how it links to our sustainability journey. So I'll go through a few slides talking about what sustainable sourcing at Nestle means to us and the role that animal agriculture plays in our journey. But to get you grounded a little bit in who Nestle is, we're the largest food and beverage company in the world, and animal-based proteins like dairy have been important to our business since our founding in 1866. Dairy and meats are one of our most utilized raw ingredients, which is why animal agriculture is so important to Nestle's sustainability journey. So I'm skipped ahead a little bit. I'll talk about Nestle in the United States. And one of the things to clarify is we are more than just chocolate. We actually are committed in the United States to enhancing the quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. And we do this for individuals and families, for thriving and resilient communities, and for the planet. So we're transforming our product portfolio, whether it's in pet care, premium waters, frozen meals, and infant nutrition, to meet the changing consumer needs by focusing on high growth food, beverage, and consumer health categories with brands that consumers love. Our operations in the United States are composed of 7 operating companies: Nestle USA, Nestle Premium Waters, Nestle Purina, Gerber, our Nestle Health Science business, Nestle Professional, which supports food service, and Nespresso. So Nestle in the US is home to more than 150 locations in 31 states, which includes our manufacturing, R&D, and supply chain facilities and corporate offices. And we employ more than 30,000 employees. And I think one of the things that I'm most personally proud of is that over 97% of US households have some sort of Nestle brand in their home. I'm having a hard time with the slides. There we go. So I want to talk about our sustainability journey. And of course, our sustainability journey at Nestle is not new to us, and it's also not new to animal agriculture. But we are going even further to scale our action based on our reach as the largest food and beverage company in the world. And we're doubling down on this effort. We are going to commit to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This is something that we announced in December of 2020. And we have interim targets along this road that we are taking that I'll talk about today. The first is that we will reduce our emissions by 20% by 2025 and by 50% by 2030. And the way that we're going to do this to accelerate our action is by investing over $3 billion in agriculture to help us get there. And this is because we believe that agriculture is the solution and not the problem in our road to net zero. So I'll talk a little bit about the pillars that we actually are focusing on to get there. So how do we actually drive this change? Well, I'll talk a little bit later about carbon neutral brands. And we have had some of our brands here in the US, like our Sweet Earth and Garden Gourmet brands, already announced their carbon neutrality, as well as our premium brands, premium water brands are going carbon neutral by 2022. But in all honesty, like that's just one part of the equation. The other part is really the sourcing the ingredients sustainably. And I'll go into more detail in this presentation about this, where we're going to partner with farmers and ranchers to support regenerative agriculture practices to ultimately reduce the carbon footprint of dairy and beef in our supply chain. Because again, as I've mentioned, they're so vitally important to our business. We're also evolving the way our packaging is recyclable and reusable by 2025. Of course, keeping the safety components of our packaging paramount, but also changing the materials so that those are better for the climate and better for people. And then ultimately making and transporting our products in our manufacturing plants. We're switching to 100% renewable energy by 2025. We've actually already announced our first solar project in Texas was announced earlier this year, and we have many more to come. So as you can see on this picture with this delicious lasagna, meat and dairy are really critical to making the products that our consumers love. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail about what we're doing at Nestle to help promote these within our consumers and with our brands. So I first have to give some context, of course, because of the amount of dairy and meats that we source, they do make up the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we don't see that necessarily as a problem, we see that as an opportunity. Some of the most exciting agriculture innovations are happening in dairy and livestock farming, and so making these farms a vital part of our overall solution is part of a key ability for us to achieve net zero in agriculture. So achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture means that we have to rely on innovations, new business models, and sustainably sourcing these nutritious ingredients in our livestock and dairy supply chains. And I want to go through a few examples of what I mean. The first is actually tackling enteric fermentation. This is, of course, one of the most challenging sources of emissions to mitigate in cattle. And while the lifespan of methane is relatively shorter than other greenhouse gas emissions, its potency cannot be ignored. So we are supporting innovation through rumen modification that helps reduce emissions, mainly through including feed additives and dietary supplements into the cattle's diet. We cannot just look at the barn or the feed yard for environmental outcomes. We also have to work with farmers to ensure that the feed used comes from regenerative practices. So we're working on programs with our suppliers that actually help sequester more carbon in the soils where feed is grown, and this will help reduce the carbon impact of feeding livestock overall. We're also supporting agripreneurship to help farmers increase the productivity of their farms, adopt new technologies and practices that result in continuous improvement and return on investment. And so we know that soil is also an excellent carbon sink. And so we're introducing agriculture practices like adaptive paddock management, where we can help improve the ability to store carbon in livestock systems. Finally, I wanted to talk about a few of the initiatives and partners that we are working with to make this possible. Nestle was the first CPG company to join the US dairy industry's Net Zero initiative. And this is a boots on the ground effort in collaboration with multiple dairy industry groups to work with farmers on advancing new technologies, practices, and management systems for farms of all sizes and in all geographies. The program takes a whole farm approach, looking at how we can create collective action, scale net zero dairy farms, and advance important research and monitoring programs. We're very proud of working with the Innovation for US Dairy and other partners on this important effort. Nestle is also working with groups like the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, or SCI platform, as well as the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, to drive incentives and action with farmers to advance regenerative practices in feed production. And with the SCI platform specifically, we're one of the founding members of the Sustainable Dairy Partnership, which enables our suppliers in the dairy value chain to more efficiently and effectively report and track their environmental, animal welfare, and social efforts without duplicating questionnaires and audits, which of course, as we know, is really important. Let's make sure our resources and time is put where it's most meaningful. And so finally, I just wanted to talk about how we bring this to our consumers. And in full admittance, our consumers in the US are not very aware of what happens in animal agriculture. And I know those of you that answered the poll know that we need to do more, and I definitely agree. And so we have been very focused at Nestle in creating a consumer-driven strategy for our sustainability efforts in animal agriculture. And so we're doing this in two ways. The first is, as I mentioned, we have several brands that are going carbon neutral, which actually doesn't mean the same thing as net zero. It actually means that part of our emissions will be reduced and then we will offset the rest. So this is a parallel journey to our ultimate goal, but it's a way for us to interact with consumers and engage with them early and often in the climate journey, as opposed to having to wait 10, 20, 50 years in order to be able to communicate the good work that's happening in agriculture. And we're really proud that actually just about a week ago, our Kit Kat brand globally committed to becoming carbon neutral in 2025. So of course, what's chocolate without dairy products? So we're very excited about that. The other half of this equation is our corporate net zero target, where we're actually driving those reductions within our supply chain. And this will be a big part of our efforts to make dairy carbon neutral by 2050, and a big part of our acceleration in the animal ag space over the next 5 to 10 years. So you'll see much more from our brands promoting the work of animal agriculture, promoting the ingredients that we have in our products like creamers and lasagna. And I look forward to partnering with many of you on this webinar as we go forward in this journey together. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Emily. Once again, so inspired by what you're doing. And when I think about the fact that you're in 97% of US households with your brand, what an opportunity to tell the story. Our last panelist is Megan Hayes, and Megan is an owner and president of Filament, a marketing agency dedicated to helping agricultural clients drive creativity and action. Megan has led the Filament team through a strong period of evolution and expansion by staying focused on fueling the minds that feed the world through experience-backed marketing and advertising. Like many Filament team members with passion in their hearts, marketing in their sweat, and agriculture in their blood, Megan grew up on a farm, and she applies that knowledge to her marketing work every day. So Megan, I know we've had many conversations about this topic, and I know from our conversations that you've had a few light bulb moments where you realize the importance of us being advocates for agriculture. So could you tell us a little bit about one of those events? Thanks.
Thanks, Jane, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm excited to be able to join you and share my story and sort of the light bulb moments that you mentioned over the course of my career and how they impact what we do at Filament every day. Filament is a full service marketing agency focused almost primarily in the agricultural space. So advocating for agriculture is extremely important to us. So early on in my career, I was the editor for a publication called Dairy Herd Management. And while I was an editor there, I had the opportunity to attend a panel discussion between the dairy industry in California and HSUS. And it was a great panel discussion. And during that presentation, Wayne Pichelli from HSUS was giving his presentation and talking, and all of a sudden on the screen, my boss's editorial was in his presentation. So it really was a light bulb moment for me to recognize that animal activists are reading the same publications that we're using to educate and communicate to our own industries. There was nothing wrong with what Tom had written, but it was really an eye-opener that activists are paying attention. They're reading the same thing, and the words and the images that we choose make a difference. Fast forward a little bit later in my career, still at Dairy Herd Management, I was writing an article about animals being stolen off farms in California. I was very proud of the article. I had worked with the local sheriff's department. I had put together a photo shoot, brought in the sheriff to one of the dairies that were impacted. This was the front page photo of the magazine at that time. And we brought in an outside consultant who was working with the publication. And the first thing he asked me about this issue was about the cows being arrested and the cows being in jail. And it was my second lesson in my career that images make a difference when we're talking about agriculture. So translate those early light bulb moments in my career to today at Filament, where we're working with clients across the agricultural industry, across the globe, putting together their marketing materials and working with farmers and ranchers. So for me and everyone at Filament, images matter. So we're always making sure that the images that we're selecting are appropriate for consumers. So we're making sure that if we're talking about a calf, it's a calf. If we're talking about a heifer, it's a heifer. If we're talking about a gilt, it's a gilt. And really making sure the images that we're selecting for our clients are consumer friendly, because even though they're communicating with the farmer about their products and services, every company is advocating for the agricultural industry in their day-to-day materials, whether or not they realize it or not. Translate that into what Filament does to advocate for the agricultural industry. So in our own marketing, we make sure that every single icon or image that we're using is realistic and representative of today's agricultural industry. So the first image on the left is a modern dairy barn. We do not use any of the quintessential red barns that you might see and that might be easy to use. We make sure all of the images that we're putting out, that we're referencing, that we're using are representative of modern agriculture. We also don't shy away from the food side of agriculture and that animals have a career change in their life. We talk about consuming meat and animal byproducts. And then on the far right, this is an image of an alfalfa hay bale. And I probably drove my design team a little bit crazy when we were putting this together, because I wanted to be sure that the alfalfa looked like alfalfa and wasn't mistaken for a straw bale. And so these are just some small nuances of things that Filament does to ensure that we're always representing what agriculture is today. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we are doing on our own team to help educate and advocate for the agricultural industry. So here's an example of some ag education activity books that we put together for our team early on in COVID. So it was a great opportunity. Families were busy at home with children. They were multitasking. So we put together activity pages to allow our team to not only bring something fun home to their family and friends in the industry, but also provide some agricultural education. And it was a great way to also open up the conversation because I know sometimes it's hard to advocate for agriculture when you're not invited into the conversation. And these activity pages opened up a way for us to engage in a conversation and to advocate for the industry. And they're probably one of our more popular downloads from our website. And then in our own marketing materials, we have several social media pages. We will put together videos. The majority of the Filament team grew up on a farm or is involved in their family farms today. And so we take the opportunity to tap into those firsthand experiences and create team activation videos and feature our family's farm and give a firsthand look at what agriculture is like and show faces behind the farm. And here's a look at one of the Filament social media campaigns where we were advocating for the agricultural industry. So Filament celebrated its 16th birthday this past year. And as part of our birthday anniversary, instead of putting up a social post that just said, hey, happy birthday, we're celebrating a big anniversary, we activated our team to advocate at a local level to give them the ability to make a difference in their local communities by donating dairy products or meat products to be able to give back and engage in a conversation. And in addition to social media, we also have a monthly newsletter and we have an ongoing blog, and we take the opportunity to feature team members who are involved in the agricultural industry. This particular one that happens to be highlighted here talks about women in agriculture, and it features 3 females within the Filament team and their firsthand experiences raising animals. So we're always looking for angles and ways that we can share agriculture story and talk about the different sides and the facets of agriculture. And we are much smaller. Filament is much smaller than the individuals here on this panel, but I hope that some of the insights that I've shared help you understand that no matter the size of the company, you can advocate for agriculture and you can make a difference. So thanks, Jane. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Megan. We look forward to hearing more about employee activation during the Q&A. So I would like all the panelists now to unmute and start their video. And we have lots of questions coming in, and I'm going to start with one of the first questions that came in. Stuart, this is for you, but I think others can add to it if they'd like. So Stuart, what if a company is concerned that being vocally supportive of animal agriculture opens them up to more attacks from critics? And how would you suggest that they navigate this concern? Stuart?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the sad realization, in my view, I mean, we are attacked all the time, but we're all being attacked. I mean, and it's not just pork; it's every segment of animal ag in particular, and large ag. There's a lot of distrust, a lot of misinformation. There's a big divergence between those who consume food and those who make it, and it's growing wider. I mean, we're many generations, many of us removed from farms now, and people don't really realize what some of us going to their grandparents' farm and having real life examples of how food is made. That's really not very evident in urban markets today. So I think that to me, I think it's strength in numbers. So the more people that talk and the more people that vocalize what they're doing every day in the social media world, the better. And it's hard, if the chorus is out there, it's kind of hard to go against it. So I don't know. That's some initial thoughts to that question.
Thank you. And Sharyl, would you mind commenting on the fact that I know you have a page targeted towards consumers and for tough questions? Any comments or additions you can share about that?
I think my general philosophy is a lot of the same media philosophy, that would you rather have the conversation in your backyard where you can participate, or would you rather have the conversation happen across the street where you can't participate? So inviting the conversation in at least lets you be part of the discussion and understand, listen to concerns, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. So again, it's, have the conversation with the individual or group, or not be part of it. So it's a trade, and I think it's definitely worth it.
Thank you. Emily, I have a question for you from a participant. How do you navigate promoting new positive efforts by some brands, such as Sweet Earth, without having consumers assume that since other brands aren't promoting that they must not be using best practices and technologies? Go ahead.
Thanks, Jane. That's a great question. And I can say that, being the type of company we are, we do have quite a wide portfolio of products. And so there are brands like Sweet Earth, where they are a vegetarian or pea or soy protein based product. But at Nestle, we consider ourselves very much an and company. And when we do get that question about, but what about dairy? What about pork? What about meat? We harken back to our core, which is the fact that we were founded as an infant nutrition company by Henri Nestle, which was fundamentally a dairy product, a cow-based dairy product that he found and fed to his neighbor's child, which saved that child's life. So for us, it really is about expanding to meet consumers' needs, but it's not about replacing that with any sort of solution that is plant-based. So you'll see us talk about expanding our portfolio to meet consumers' changing needs, while also doubling down on our animal agriculture-based ingredients like dairy and meats, because of our pizza, lasagna, creamers, again, that our consumers really love and are indulgent for them. And yet, we do have to make solutions in that industry as well, which is why we come to forums like this to talk with our colleagues and partners about how we can do that together. So it is very important to us, and we don't consider it, one is better than the other. You will not see us provide that kind of messaging. You may see a brand, advocate and try to reach their consumers, of course, with particular messaging about a plant-based offering. But that is, again, a brand strategy. It's not a Nestle strategy. So we very much are working across the whole portfolio on greenhouse gas and other environmental and social issues.
Thank you. Megan, this is for you. If a company is interested in being an active advocate, like what social media platforms would you start? Where is Filament looking into monitoring the conversation?
Great question. So Filament has several social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn. But if you're really looking to activate your team, I would identify what are the platforms they're most comfortable on. So that's one of the initiatives that we're working on right now at Filament, is putting together materials to help our entire team advocate for the industry. So many team members may not be comfortable advocating or communicating on the platforms that the company is based in. And so really identifying what channels your team members are comfortable participating in, and then creating materials to help them engage on those channels. And then we're also working to help each of our team members feel comfortable engaging in those online conversations, as well as making sure that their profiles are up to date and ability to proactively represent the agricultural industry. So those are just a couple things I'd recommend taking a look at that's been working for us.
All right, thank you. Stuart, how are you encouraging and supporting your thousands of farmer partners to modernize their operation based on trends? And then also, what are you seeing as emerging trends and challenges?
Well, I think, I think the trends are, there's several. I mean, as I mentioned, at the beginning, I think that the interest in climate and environment has come roaring back after a bit of a respite during COVID. I think added to that are social issues, and worker safety is key right now. Many people are focused on that. So I think in going even further off into the future, I mean, water is actually going to be a big issue. For much of my career, you always hear about water becoming the new oil, but I think that that's truly going to be a trend. I mean, you have most people maybe not even remember we had a 0 day in South Africa, where South Africa almost ran out of water, and a major city, and a drought that continues in the southwest of the United States. So water and water stewardship is going to be a big trend for our industry going forward. And I think one of the, more to the theme of communications, I think you're seeing the animal activists becoming more and more aggressive, undertaking Antifa-like activities, invading farms and breaching biosecurity, endangering herds of animals, and that's trouble. So those are things that come to mind from the question as to trends going forward, and in terms of encouraging farmers. I think I always have interesting conversations with people outside of work, where you think of a family farm. Most people who have an image of a family farm, but if you put actually in my world of pork production, a family farm next to a conventional company-owned and operated farm, you really couldn't differentiate between the two. A family farm, a family hog farm, looks like a corporate hog farm, and modern technology is in both. And they're both operating in a good way, and I think that what we do with the relationships that we have with contract and family farms who are operating under long-term contract with us is communicate with them and talk about issues of the day in a way that they understand what we're facing. So I don't know. Those are some thoughts.
And Sharyl, do you want to add to that and maybe talk a little bit about the technology advocacy initiatives that you have globally and what some of those trends are?
Yes. So obviously we've launched our sustainability goals, and we have 14, And some of them are specifically directed towards farmers and in soil health and water health, as Stuart was saying. He's absolutely right. You know, water is the new oil. But when we developed those goals, we got feedback from the public, from farmers and ranchers, to make sure that they were actionable, that they actually benefited both farmers and consumers and our environment. So just about a month ago, we announced a new carbon initiative. So obviously soil is one of the great holders of carbon. So the less soil is disturbed, the more it holds or sequesters carbon. So from an agriculture standpoint, from a farming standpoint, farmers manage a lot of farm ground. The less that they disturb that soil, the more it becomes a holding bank. And so we are working with farmers on not only how to improve their management practices to do cover crops, no-till, low-till, and other actions that are going to sequester that carbon, but then also we're helping farmers to actually measure and get paid for carbon credits. So we've created a carbon market. And it's a new revenue source for farmers. It's a win-win all the way around. And then we also just announced a sort of a climate leader program where we're finding farmers that are doing the right things or really leading in this space, and then helping to promote their practices to try to gain adoption for it. So we absolutely think lead by example, and we're trying to highlight and tell the stories of all the farmers and ranchers that are really getting it right.
And Jane, let me add to that too. I mean, those are great examples, and it kind of comes down to, I think maybe, you know, farmers, what's in it for the farmer? You know, why are they doing something? You know, in the case that Sharyl gave about improving yield and using cover crops and those things. I mean, that's an important point. You know, another good example is what we're doing in terms of producing renewable natural gas on hog farms. What we're partnering with at least the image is to partner with our contract growers to install digesters in covered lagoons to capture methane, and the methane is used as a natural gas put into a pipeline and for pipeline use in other places, and that provides another source of income, a diversified income for the family farm. So that encourages a grower to expand and to do something new and different on their farm that has significant environmental benefits.
Yeah, it is great comments. It's so important that farmers get, one, recognized for what they are doing, but two, somehow create a financial revenue stream for those efforts. Emily, we have a question for you regarding the Net Zero initiative. How specifically is Nestle engaged in dairy's Net Zero initiative? And can you talk more about your relationship with farmers during Net Zero solution adoption and how you support them?
Sure, it's a great question. I think very appropriate after Stuart and Sharyl's comments. So, you know, the thing that farmers need is financial support to make this transition happen. And they don't just need financial support, a one-time shot, and then, you know, bye, we'll see you later, right? It's that sustained return on investment for that technology or practice that really also has to be worked out. And so for the Net Zero initiative in particular, Nestle is providing $10 million over the next 5 years to the initiative that goes directly to farmers. That money will be invested in the initiatives that I talked about, whether it's doing regenerative agriculture practices in feed production, whether it's actually putting in manure management technologies at a farm in order to create it as a net zero farm, or whether it's to go directly to match for the research and monitoring efforts that the industry needs. That's where our dollars are going to be spent. And so how we interact with farmers is in a couple of ways. Nestle does have direct fresh milk markets where we are sourcing milk directly from farmers. So again, we have that, we're the intermediary, if you will, with that farmer and sourcing the milk directly. So we are working quite closely with those farmers where we have that opportunity. The other thing that I'd like to share to anyone on the phone that's from the dairy industry is that we need their help. We're working with our cooperatives, our large suppliers across the industry to help get, cut through some of the noise, understand, what the initiative is, and implore them to call the Innovation Center to get more information about this initiative and our participation in it, because we'd like to see this again as an accelerator, not only to figure out how large farms can implement some of the technologies, but what do smaller farms need? How do they start making some of the transitions? And I'll steal Krista Hardin's line, because I always do, with pride and permission, which is that all farms have to do something, but not all farms have to do everything. And I think that's a really important point as we think about animal agriculture, just what we're trying to do as being, the voice of the consumer on this, is that you will not see messages from Nestle that's something like 100% this or 100% that. We really are trying to take consumers on a journey that is a very complicated story to tell, and they don't understand it. And so we're going to use a variety of means to get at consumers based on what our brand's essence might be, based on what the consumer is telling us they want to hear about. And so I always say, like, I don't care if we call it net zero, I don't care if we call it carbon, whatever. I want to reach the consumer where they're going to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and connect them to that farmer. So again, I don't think there's one way that any one company is going to communicate about this. And I don't think there's a best or a worst way to do it. I think it's about connecting with those consumers in an authentic way, connecting with farmers with the right resources at the right times, and then hopefully bringing it all together. So I'm sure that's what keeps us all busy every day.
Very true. And kind of tying into that, what Krista said about everybody has to do something, right? Megan, I have a question for you. How do you advise your clients with all the different terms and words that are used in the agricultural world? For example, a farmer or supplier may use operation, but that sounds too dry or factory-like for a consumer who really expects to hear the word farm and loves that word farm. So do you want to talk to us about words matter at Filament?
Sure. So one perfect example of that, because there's probably a million, is the word dairy farmer or the word dairy producer, and determining which of those words or combination of words is the right one to be using in marketing material, in communicating with the industry in a consumer-friendly way. So we recently did some man on the street interviews with dairy farmers, as well as put out some industry polls in social media chat groups to better understand. We believed dairy farmer was the right terminology. We know from research that that's a consumer-friendly term, but we weren't sure if dairy farmers wanted to be referred to dairy farmers. And so we did a lot of legwork, and were able to pinpoint that dairy farmers do prefer to be called dairy farmers. They do prefer that in their communication. It didn't matter the size of the herd that you were working with. And it also happens to be a very consumer-friendly terminology. And so we just did the legwork to try and be sure that when we're advising clients, putting together materials, that we're speaking in a language that is not only preferred by the end producer themselves, but is also consumer friendly.
Thank you. And continuing on this word theme, Emily, I'll start with you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on words too, Sharyl and Stuart, how you talk about them. But Emily, how do you help consumers differentiate terms such as natural, organic, sustainable, regenerative, non-GMO? From what I'm seeing, consumers are really just confused with all the terms and logos. So go ahead.
Sure. Well, thanks for the hard question. Whoever asked that. No, this is really tough. And so one of the things that we do is, first and foremost, I work quite closely with our marketing teams, right? So one of the first things we educate on is that organic is a USDA certified label. And so you're under really strict standards in order to do that. And consumers should only be looking for a USDA organic label. And like in our Gerber brands, we do have an organic portfolio, which is of course core to what those parents want for their babies. We differentiate that organic line from our naturals line, which again has standards related to natural. Of course, the FDA or regulators don't particularly have a definition of natural, so we've created that ourselves for that portfolio so that our consumers can go in and see exactly what we mean by natural. So that's important to differentiate and be very clear, not only with our consumers, but even with our own teams about which is which and how those are defined. And so I think, moving beyond that, one of the things we have to keep in mind is, of course, bioengineering generally. We traditionally at Nestle have not had a position on non-GMO or GMO, per se, but we are being required by the FDA to release and relabel all of our foods as, whether or not they're bioengineered. So we are looking into that, of course, as every company is. But again, we're, really balancing that act between consumers understanding, was this good or bad, right? With consumer education and advocacy, as well as, doing what the government requires and doing the labeling. I think in terms of sustainable or responsibly raised or those things, we always follow our responsible sourcing standard. So again, anything today is going to say, responsibly sourced, because that's per our standard, which is public. You can go to our website and find it. So again, any consumer that is, wanting to go to that in particular would see that's what that standard means. Here's what the program is involved, so that they, there's always that substantiation. And as we evolve with those terminologies, we are doing, like Megan mentioned, consumer insights on, what word is going to resonate most with them. And it's my job, of course, working with our lawyers and our marketing folks to say, how do you want me to substantiate that? And then how do we make that public, so that they can tie these two things together? And I think that's just what's really important, is that, again, I think because the complexity of this, business of sustainability and food and beverage, I just think it's not going to be a one-stop shop for consumers. So I think it's just about education and advocacy and making sure they can find what, how you're meeting it, and being very transparent about that. So we don't say anything on our products that you couldn't find on our website somewhere.
Stuart or Sharyl, anything to add about words in your companies?
Well, go ahead, Sharyl.
I was gonna say, yes, for sure. And I want to do a +1, and I echo everything Emily said. Words absolutely matter. We have to be very careful that we're clear, and for years, the biotechnology industry used the word biotechnology and avoided GMO. But the reality is consumers use the word GMO. So we have, I guess, skated to where the puck is, and we use GMO and we have a website called GMO Answers, because that's what consumers are searching for. That's what they're looking. So if we're using words that feel nicer to us, but they're not the words that are being Googled, then it's really kind of a lost cause. But Emily talked about transparency, and we have a new commitment to transparency, because it's not just putting the information out there, but putting it out there in a way that consumers can understand, so that it actually means something. And for example, we put a whole plant breeding database out that shows what technologies were used and what seeds that we were developed, and a whole primer on, what is a biotech seed, what is a hybrid seed, how is it, what is genetic modification. So it's probably more than most of us would want to even sit and read, but it's there, it's written in plain English. And again, you have to put it out there in terms that are being used and that consumers are looking for.
Thank you. Stuart, anything to add?
Yeah, I totally agree, with both comments. The, terms are and there's a lot of confusion over terminology and labels. Labels are confusing to consumers as well. And Smithfield's tagline is "Good food responsibly," and that actually came out of the sustainability platform. For years, people asked us to define what sustainability was, and we really don't. And we don't say we're this is sustainable food or sustainable products. We try to use terminology that makes sense and is truthful. And good food responsibly for us is something that we, used as a tagline for that reason. I will say trust and transparency again is key, and explaining what you do and why you do it, and what those terms mean. For all of our pillars, we do that across the board. One example I'll just leave you with is an ingredient glossary. We actually post a usable ingredient glossary for just about every ingredient in any of our products, so someone can type it in and look and see what that product, that scary term actually means, and what it is, and what a plain English term means that's equivalent, and what it's used for. So that's just my addition.
Great idea on that item. So for anyone, there has been a correlation between factories, animal production, food production factories, and COVID-19 outbreaks. As you know, that's been in the news, including facilities such as meatpacking plants, right? I have not seen animal agriculture try to defend or explain themselves in these articles or reports. Why? Stuart, I'll start with you, and we'll see if anyone else has anything to add.
Well, I mean, I think that COVID has hit a lot of industries, and the food industry in particular. We saw early on and made everyone appreciate where their food came from a little bit early, when shelves were empty of a lot of stock of different types of food, particularly meat. And I think that for us, and I can't speak for the entire industry, I mean, we've been very vocal about what we did and didn't do during COVID. I think that for many industries, what was going on and it just doesn't necessarily start or stop with animal ag, but the spread of COVID is a community disease, and what happens in folks' businesses is reflective of the community as a whole, I think. So we did communicate, and some others communicated as well. But as everyone knows, bad news sells, and bad news is what people read. And when you want to talk about good news and the small number of folks who were impacted in different places, no one really wants to hear about that. So I don't know.
Yeah, Stuart, I'll just add that there was a lot of engagement that we did with suppliers like Smithfield and others, that are in our value chain around, what are we doing in our plants, and then best practice sharing and what's happening. And I do think there was this community approach by the food supply chain, quite frankly, and that's what I personally experienced, of course, tracking this, but it is so difficult, like Stuart said, and I think it continues to be the challenge, and sort of, again, telling the story of how we're trying to get ahead of things that, the CDC and others were working on, how we all as a nation and community and states were trying to handle things, and how diverse that was across the whole United States. And of course, my role working across North America was tracking all of that, and it's so complex. And I think you do tend to hear about the areas of what happened that maybe perhaps wasn't the right thing at the time, or this and that, and there aren't the stories of best practice sharing, collaboration, PPE sharing. Does anyone need anything? Who needs what? We got PPE out to farmers directly, out to their employees. I know Stewart and other companies were doing things like that as well. It's just a lot of those efforts going on, but it's just, as we know, we've all as a nation have experienced that. So I think it's unfortunate that we don't get that story out.
I agree, and it's the story of what companies like yourselves did during COVID is a remarkable story. That close to hundreds of millions of dollars that you've invested to protect your employees and your teammates is a hard story to get out, but I try to share it in conversations with people because they bring it up, right? So going over from a current topic to looking at a current topic proactively, Megan, on a more positive topic, let's talk about looking at a current event and always being aware of what's happening, and then taking that to use it to tell the story of agriculture. And do you have an example of how you might have done that?
Sure. So it's always good to be looking to see what are some of the current events happening, to be able to see, are there opportunities to be able to share animal agricultural story. So one specific example that we took the opportunity to share more about animal agriculture was the Super Bowl. So typically for a marketing agency, you would expect to see some type of marketing blog around what are the commercials, what were the wins, the fails related to the TV ads, et cetera. Instead of taking the typical spin, we pivoted to write about the animals that were featured in the commercials themselves. So, that's just a small example, but we're always looking for ways where, what's an in to talk about animal agriculture? It doesn't have to be a big opportunity or story, but what are the small places where you can lean into the conversation and share about animal agriculture? So that's just one example of a small opportunity that, opened the door to talk about agriculture.
Great. And Sharyl, I had a question for you. You mentioned your 14 sustainability goals. Do you want to just comment on those a little bit more? We'd love to hear about them.
Sure. I talked about the carbon one already, but our sustainability goals are in 4 big buckets. They're around farmers, so providing training to farmers. And a lot of the training will go to actually smallholder farmers around the world, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions while increasing yields, soil health, water health, biodiversity, but then also volunteer hours. So we were just talking about COVID safety. So not only are we trying to give back to our communities, but we've given all of our employees basically the equivalent of 2 days to do volunteer work and created a tracking system because it's important, and it's important to give back. May is Mental Health Month. So we're really trying to empower our employees to get involved. And then, of course, increasing supply chain transparency, back on our advocacy discussion, and making the information available on where food comes from, how it's produced, recognizing that people are coming at this from a different perspective. And Megan, your story about your very first story about why is the cow in jail? It's like, it's almost shocking, but it's true. It's people don't understand. So we've got to make sure that we're listening and looking at things from other lenses.
So we're on to our last question, and I want to ask it of all of our panelists, and I'll start with Megan. Megan, do you feel we are making a difference, and why? Are we reaching consumers and the public with our story?
I would definitely say yes. I think we're definitely making progress. I know I myself have been inspired to hear what everyone has shared today that they're focusing on. And I tell my team all the time, small things make a huge difference. And where I see the biggest opportunity or change happening is the groundswell of small things happening. The number of people being willing to engage in conversation. So I do think we're making a difference, and I do see hundreds of thousands of tiny things happening. And I know together it will be such a huge impact to the industry. So I would say yes.
All right, Emily?
I would say yes, and it's growing. And the reason I say that is because I have seen, and we continue to see, greater consumer interest in wanting to learn about these things, right? So you get those anecdotes of, consumer interest in sustainability or interest in understanding where their food comes from. And, when you really get to a brand level, product taste and quality are always number 1 and 2. So, okay, let's put those aside. Sustainability is right up there now. And we do see this wave. I do think, and we think at Nestle, coming out of COVID, where, it's kind of the next thing is this environmental climate sort of type movement. How do we recover from the pandemic in a way that is more sustainable? And so consumers are also getting there, which I think is the game changer for us trying to have the conversation. I think we've had the conversation within the industry for a long time, but now you're seeing this momentum move where our brands are going to be able to reach consumers where they are and where they want to go, which, I'll admit has not been there in the way that it should have been. It was much more negative, I would say, 10 years ago than it is today. I think they're more open to seeing what we're doing in this space and accepting that and accepting the kinds of products that use those ingredients for where that progress and continuous improvement is going. I see it just becoming less of an either or and much more of a journey type reaction from our consumers, which is encouraging.
Great. Stuart? Any comments?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat. So I would say I do think things are improving. More people are engaged, at least from judging from folks looking at what we do and engaging with us. I wish it's always been the same when I've taken someone on an actual farm that have never been to a farm. They always emerge. You can kind of see the stress on their face when they come onto the farm. But then after they go into the barn and see the animals and see what's going on and see the operations, they are excited and excited about it. So you can't do that with everyone, but like I mentioned, the virtual tour and other things, it just seems folks are more open and engaged about it. And despite the propensity for people to read bad news, the challenge is that more and more people, there's still a lot of lack of trust, and people are only talking amongst themselves in their own circles. So they take, value judgments and express values based on things that they think that they should think. So it's still a challenge, but I think things are improving.
And Sharyl, any comments?
I reiterate what everyone has said, and I would just add, we've all got in the past, year or so, a crash course in science and modeling. And so I think there's a little more aptitude now to talk about science or to take a virtual tour. However, and just as Stuart started to allude to, it is not just about throwing facts and science and figures at people. It's earning trust. It's listening. It's to understand that everyone isn't comfortable. Everyone doesn't understand. So that's, I think, the thing is to use shared values to build that bridge of trust and give us all, the social license that we need to operate.
Thank you. We hope that you were inspired by everything that our panelists are doing for advocacy for agriculture. I know I was. Advocating for agriculture needs to be a part of every company and organization and individual's strategy, right? And so I would encourage you to be a driver in your company. For that 47% that doesn't have it as a major initiative, we hope we inspired you to do more, because our farmers are really, and the future of food production in the United States, they're really depending on all of us. So I'm going to turn it over to Hannah and wish you all a good afternoon. Hannah?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jane, for moderating, and for all of our panelists for a really inspiring and robust discussion. A lot of great conversation happening in the Q&A box as well as over on Twitter. So you'll have lots of notifications to check.